Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into something truly extraordinary, the intricate mosaic floors of ancient Roman villas. These weren't just decorative tiles thrown together for the sake of beauty or simple functionality. They were stories, secrets, windows into the lives of people who lived 2,000 years ago. From hidden messages about wealth and status to intimate glimpses of what they feared, what they loved, and what they dreamed about. The Mosaics tell us everything. So if you haven't already, smash that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden treasures and forgotten mysteries. Let me know in the comments what aspect of Roman life fascinates you most. Tell me which mosaics you'd want to walk across. And while you're down there, turn up your speakers a bit, get comfortable, maybe pour yourself a drink, because we're about to walk through the stone corridors of a Roman villa and discover what secrets the floor beneath their feet was trying to tell us. Picture yourself stepping through the atrium of a wealthy Roman's home, your feet landing on a carefully crafted mosaic floor. Every piece is deliberate. Every tiny stone, every fragment of glass, every colored pebble placed by skilled hands tells part of a much larger story. The Romans didn't invent mosaics, but they perfected them. They took the art form that started in the Mediterranean and turned it into something that was both devastatingly beautiful and profoundly communicative. Unlike a painting that could fade or be destroyed, a mosaic was permanent. These floors could withstand centuries, and in doing so, they became time capsules, frozen moments of Roman ambition, fear, and aspiration. You'd feel the texture beneath your sandals, hard and cool and absolutely deliberate. Every footstep would be a small conversation between you and whoever designed this floor, between you and the artist who spent weeks or months placing each tiny stone. Mosaics weren't found everywhere in a Roman villa. They were luxury items, reserved for the wealthiest, reserved for those who wanted to make a statement. And what a statement they made. To commission a floor mosaic required resources, serious resources. It required skilled artisans who understood geometry, color theory, and composition. It required imported stones from across the empire, from quarries and workshops scattered from Britain to Egypt to the edges of Mesopotamia. It required planning and vision and months of work. So if you walked into a room and saw an elaborate mosaic, you immediately understood that the person who lived here was important. They had money. They had the kind of money that could hire master craftsmen and import rare stones. They had connections to trade network, chaos that spanned continents. They had taste, refined and educated. The very presence of a mosaic was a whispered conversation between the owner and every visitor who ever stepped inside. It was a form of communication that didn't require words. It was status made visible, ambition made permanent, identity made tangible beneath your feet. What's fascinating is that Roman homeowners weren't just thinking about their own lives when they commissioned these floors. They were thinking about how they wanted to be remembered, what message they wanted to broadcast about themselves and their family. They were thinking about legacy. Some mosaics were elaborate displays of wealth and knowledge. They referenced classical mythology, showcasing the owner's education and sophistication. To recognize the story of Orpheus taming the wild beasts with his magical music, or to understand the trials of Ulysses wandering the Mediterranean, or to know the complex family dramas of the house of Atreus, marked you as cultured, refined, part of an educated elite. In one villa near Naples, archaeologists found a stunning mosaic depicting the scene where Orpheus plays his lyre and wild animals gather around him in peaceful rapture. Lions, tigers, deer, serpents, all entranced by the power of his music. A homeowner who commissioned this was saying something specific. I appreciate beauty. I understand the power of art. I am civilized. These mosaics were basically ancient flex culture, honestly. They said, I'm smart. I'm well-read. I understand the great stories of our world. I've been educated in the classics. I belong among the elite. And in Roman society, where status was everything, where your place in the social hierarchy determined your opportunities and your power, that kind of signal was absolutely invaluable. It was a form of social positioning that couldn't be ignored. Other mosaics served a different purpose entirely. They were protective. They warned. They threatened. In a villa in Pompeii, archaeologists found a famous mosaic at the entrance of a home. It depicted a chained dog, fierce and snarling, with two words beneath it in Latin: Cave canem. Beware of dog. It's almost humorous when you think about it. Imagine walking up to someone's house for the first time, and instead of a verbal warning or a sign in wood, there's this warning permanently embedded in their floor. But it's also ingenious. It's practica, ill and artistic at the same time. The mosaic served as both a genuine warning about an actual guard dog and a statement about the owner's authority, their right to protect what was theirs, their willingness to use force if necessary. Some owners took the warnings even further. They included mosaics depicting supernatural creatures, demons, evil eyes, basilisks, symbols meant to ward off bad luck or malicious intent. Not just protection from physical threats, but protection from spiritual ones. These weren't just pretty pictures meant to entertain. They were talismans. They were protective magic embedded in stone. They were a Roman's way of saying to any potential thief or curse-bringer or envious neighbor, this place is protected. This place is sacred. Don't even think about crossing me or my family. The daily life of Romans leaked into their mosaic floors in ways we're only now beginning to fully appreciate, and it's in these everyday scenes where we find the most human glimpses of the ancient world. Hunting scenes were enormously popular among the wealthy, who fancied themselves sportsmen and adventurers. These mosaics would depict exotic animals from across the empire, dramatic kills, the thrill of the chase, lions and leopards and wild boar being hunted down by aristocratic hunters on horseback or on foot. They reinforced a specific image of the owner as strong, brave, masculine, and in control of nature itself. They said, I am a man of action. I am powerful. I bend nature to my will. Fishing scenes appeared too, especially in villas closer to the Mediterranean coast. These were entered with surprising detail, nets being cast, specific varieties of fish being caught, fishermen in boats. Gardens appeared, sometimes realistic, sometimes fantastical with grotesque creatures and mythological beings. Market scenes showed the commerce of daily life with vendors hawking their wares, people buying and selling. The bustle of public life brought into private spaces. In some villas, particularly in the homes of merchants or wealthy industrialists, mosaics would depict the actual goods they traded. A wine merchant might commission an elaborate floor showing the entire process of winemaking, from the harvest of grapes with workers cutting bunches from vines, to the treading of grapes to make juice, to the fermentation in huge clay amphorae, to the final product being transport, in merchant ships. An olive oil dealer might have an entire room devoted to mosaics celebrating the olive tree, its harvest, its processing, its uses. An importer of purple dye might show the murex shells being collected and processed. These floors were basically the ancient equivalent of LinkedIn profiles or business advertisements. They told visitors exactly who this person was and exactly how they made their fortune. They said, "I am a man of commerce. I control trade networks. I have access to goods you desire. I am successful." What's remarkable is how specific these images could be, how much detail the artists included. In one villa in Pompeii, archaeologists found a mosaic that depicted a woman and man in what appears to be a private moment, hinting at the intimate life that happened behind closed doors. In another, there's a mosaic showing a child playing with toys, one of the rarest glimpses of childhood in the ancient world that we possess. These aren't grand mythological scenes with gods and heroes. They're snapshots of reality, frozen in stone, personal and immediate, and achingly human. The most intriguing thing about many Roman mosaics is what they reveal about the owner's fears and anxieties, the things that kept them up at night. Wealthy Romans were keenly aware of their position in society. They had much to lose. An illness could wipe out their investment. A political shift could destroy their status. A vengeful neighbor could hire someone to curse them. A rival merchant could undercut their business. And sometimes that anxiety, that fundamental insecurity beneath the wealth, shows up in the mosaics they commissioned. There are mosaics that depict symbols meant to bring good luck, prosperity, or protection. The symbols were extremely specific and drawn from an almost dizzying variety of sources. An evil eye, that symbol that could ward off the dangerous power of envious stares from neighbors and enemies. Images of prosperity and abundance, cornucopias overflowing with fruit and grain. Phalluses, a symbol of fertility and good fortune that appeared in the most unexpected places. Symbols from mystery religions that the homeowner followed. Religions like the worship of Mithras or Isis that offered personal salvation and secret knowledge. Some villas have mosaics with cryptic messages or unusual numerical patterns that scholars are still trying to fully decode. Were they magical formulas designed to ward off harm? Coded messages meant only for family members or initiates? Mathematical jokes that demonstrated the owner's learning? Proprieties inscriptions meant to sanctify the space? We honestly don't always know. But the fact that they're there, deliberately worked into the mosaic where they would be seen and walked on daily, suggests the owner believed in their power, believed that the symbols themselves had agency. The mosaic floors were also deeply connected to the Roman religious landscape, which was far more complicated and personal than people often realize. Romans didn't just believe in the official state gods like Jupiter and Mars. They believed in household gods called the Lares and Penates, who protected the family and the home. They believed in spirits inhabiting water and soil. They believed in the power of individual fortune, of genius, and Romans were also incredibly open to religious ideas from across the empire. They incorporated gods and practices from Egypt, from Gaul, from Persia. A mosaic featuring Bacchus might indicate the owner was involved in wine trade, or it might suggest they were a follower of mystery religions centered on that god that promised ecstasy and spiritual transformation. A mosaic with serpents and specific symbols might connect the owner to cults of Asclepius, the god of healing. A mosaic showing symbols associated with Mars might suggest the owner's military service or political ambitions. These religious signals told visitors something crucial about the spiritual life, the beliefs, the religious allegiances of the person who lived there, and also perhaps revealed something about the uncertainties that drove them to seek divine protection. Consider the wealth indicators embedded in these floors, the material economics of status and power. The cost of materials alone was absolutely staggering. Lapis lazuli, That deep, almost impossibly blue stone had to be imported all the way from Afghanistan, traveling along the Silk Road through countless intermediaries. It was more expensive than gold in some cases. When you see lapis lazuli in a mosaic, you're looking at wealth beyond imagination. Purple glass, created through a special and extremely labor-intensive process involving specific minerals and high heat, was extraordinarily rare and costly. This wasn't something you could easily produce. It required advanced knowledge and resources. Red porphyry, that beautiful deep red stone, could only be quarried in Egypt, and even then only with explicit imperial permission. It was a stone reserved for the emperor and the wealthiest of the elite. If your mosaic contained these materials, you were essentially telling every single visitor, I have connections to global trade networks. I have the kind of money that can reach across continents. I have the kind of power that gets things done. I am not just wealthy, I am supernaturally wealthy. The Romans understood the psychology of material wealth on a fundamental level. They understood that surrounding yourself with rare, beautiful, expensive things communicated status more effectively than any title or any words ever could. It was a form of visual rhetoric. The artisans who created these mosaics were their own kind of celebrities in the ancient world, more renowned in their time than we might imagine. Some were wealthy enough to own their own workshops and employed dozens of apprentices. Their names, when we're lucky enough to find them, appear on the mosaics themselves, signatures embedded in stone saying, I made this. This work represents my skill and vision. These were skilled workers, people who had spent 15, 20, sometimes 30 years learning their craft, perfecting techniques that required not just artistic talent, but deep mathematical precision. Creating a mosaic wasn't just about placing pretty stones in pretty patterns. It was about understanding perspective and proportion and color theory. It was about understanding how the human eye moves through space and how light plays off different colored stones at different times of day. The tesserae, those tiny individual pieces that make up a mosaic, had to be cut to specific sizes and shapes using hand tools. A stone cutter might produce hundreds of pieces in a day, each one needing to be relatively uniform. The pattern had to be planned in advance, sketched out on papyrus or marked on the floor, and had to be approved by the patron who was paying for it. It was a collaborative project between the artistic visionaries and the patron who was funding it, and sometimes those tensions between these two sides show up in the finished work. There are mosaics where you can see corrections, where the design was clearly changed part way through. There are places where the artisan seems to have gotten a bit rebellious, adding details that might not have been in the original plan, personalizing the work in ways the patron might not have expected. The mosaics also tell us about what Romans found beautiful, what appealed to their aesthetic sensibilities. There's a certain balance, a certain harmony to the best of them. They understood color relationships. They knew that certain combinations would draw the eye or create a sense of calm. Floral patterns, geometric designs, elaborate borders that frame and contain scenes within scenes. The composition could be deceptively complex. A seemingly simple scene of a figure might be part of a larger geometric pattern that only becomes apparent when you step back and look at the whole floor. This kind of sophisticated thinking about design, about how the eye moves through space, about the relationship between foreground and background, suggests a level of artistic culture that perhaps we don't always give the Romans credit for. What's particularly moving about mosaics is their paradoxical nature, their remarkable durability combined with their fundamental fragility. They've survived earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, fires, the collapse of empires, barbarian invasions, and the relentless grinding passage of 2,000 years. Their durability is astonishing. And yet they're incredibly vulnerable to the wrong kind of human touch, to modern environmental conditions they weren't designed to withstand. Removing a mosaic from its original location to preserve it in a museum can actually destroy it. The vibrations of moving it, the changes in humidity and temperature, the disruption of the support beneath it, all of these things can cause the tesserae to shift and separate. Exposing a mosaic to modern pollution and acid rain damages the stones, degrading them faster than natural weathering would. Direct sunlight can fade the colors. Foot traffic, ironically, wears away the grout between the tesserae. Some of the most famous and beautiful mosaics in the world are gradually fading before our eyes, the colors bleaching out from brilliant to dull, the tesserae becoming loose and shifting. There are conservation efforts underway, and teams of experts work tirelessly to preserve what remains, developing new techniques and materials that might help protect these ancient floors. But there's an inherent tragedy in the very act of preservation. These floors were made to be walked on, to be lived with, to be part of daily life, to be worn down by use. Now they have to be cordoned off and protected behind barriers and ropes. Visitors walk around them rather than on them. The vitality of them, the way they functioned as living parts of a home, as everyday objects that were beautiful precisely because they were functional, is something we can never fully recover. The thing about reading mosaics as historical documents is that they're not always straightforward. And this is where archaeology becomes as much art as science. A scene might mean what we think it means, or it might be an inside joke we've lost the context for. A symbol might be religious, or it might be purely practical or decorative. A figure might be mythological, or it might be an actual person, a portrait of the homeowner or a family member. Sometimes a motif appears in multiple houses, suggesting it's a popular pattern, but sometimes it appears only once, suggesting it's deeply personal. Sometimes the mosaic is crude and functional, made quickly and cheaply to fill a space, done by a young apprentice still learning the trade. Other times it's a clear masterpiece that took months or even years to complete, created by a master artist at the height of their powers. The skill level varies dramatically from villa to villa, which tells us something significant about the owner's resources and priorities. If you had a small mosaic in your entryway that was hastily and somewhat clumsily done, maybe you were trying to keep up appearances on a limited budget, or maybe the mosaic simply didn't matter that much to you. If you had vast rooms entirely covered in elaborate scenes, if you had multiple mosaics, if the artistry was exceptional, you were definitely announcing something significant about your wealth and importance. You were making a statement that couldn't be ignored. What's particularly interesting and revealing is when we find mosaics that seem out of place, that don't fit the narrative we expect. There are bawdy, crude, almost pornographic mosaics in homes that also contain fine philosophical art and expensive mythological scenes. There are mosaics depicting monsters and demons and evil eyes in houses that also have peaceful pastoral scenes and religious symbols. There are symbols of evil and protection right next to each other, sometimes in the same room. This inconsistency suggests that Romans, like all people in all times, were deeply complicated. Their aesthetic sensibilities weren't unified. They weren't trying to create a coherent, artistic vision throughout their home. They could appreciate beauty and crudity at the same time. They could be devout believers and skeptical cynics simultaneously. They could fear demons and bad luck and malevolent magic, while also making jokes about it. The mosaic floors, in their contradictions and inconsistencies, actually reveal the contradictions of Roman life itself. The fact that Romans were human, that they contained multitudes. The process of excavating and studying these floors has revealed patterns and connections we might never have noticed otherwise. When archaeologists find multiple villas with similar mosaics, they can trace trade routes, regional styles, and artistic influences that spread across the empire. A particular artistic style found in villas scattered across North Africa might point to a famous workshop in Alexandria. A repeated design element showing up in multiple excavations might indicate a single famous artist whose work was highly sought after by the wealthy elite. The distribution of rare materials tells us about the empire's supply chains and trade networks. We can literally map luxury trade networks by following the path of lapis lazuli and purple glass across the ancient world from their places of origin to villas in distant provinces. We can see which port cities were wealthy enough to import these materials and which were not. The mosaics become data, layers of information about economics, culture, artistry, and daily life that wouldn't be available from any other source. Scholars can now analyze the chemical composition of stones to determine their origin. They can study wear patterns to understand how rooms were used and which spots got the most foot traffic. They can map regional styles and track the movements of master craftsmen. But even as the mosaics become data and evidence, even as they're analyzed and cataloged and studied, they also remain profoundly personal. Each one represents a decision made by a real person or real family, a decision made by someone living in a real place, trying to create something beautiful, trying to communicate something important about themselves to the world. The mosaics are both public statements and private dreams. In some ways, we're much closer to understanding the Romans through their floors than we ever could be through their written documents. Documents tell us what people wanted us to think about them, what they wanted official history to record. But mosaics sometimes reveal what they actually thought about themselves, what they feared, what they valued, what brought them joy. What strikes me most about Roman mosaic floors is that they weren't meant to last forever, even though they did. They were made to be experienced in the moment, to be walked on daily, to be lived with, to be worn down gradually by the footsteps of family and servants and visitors. They were functional art. They were decoration, yes, but also practical floors that needed to endure. The fact that we can look at them now, nearly 2,000 years later, feels almost like we're eavesdropping on something private. We're seeing their homes, their dreams, their fears, their aesthetic choices, all preserved in stone. We're walking where they walked, stepping on the exact same spots they stepped on, seeing what they saw from roughly the same angle. And in doing that, we become connected to them across the vast expanse of time in a way that reading a text or looking at a statue simply cannot provide. A Roman villa owner from 2 millennia ago won't speak to us in words. Their voices are lost, but they speak through their mosaics in a language that transcends translation. They tell us about their ambitions and their insecurities, their knowledge and their ignorance, their refined taste and their superstitions, their relationships and their daily routines, what they found beautiful and what terrified them. They tell us that they were just like us in so many fundamental ways. They wanted to be seen and acknowledged. They wanted to be remembered after they were gone. They wanted to create beauty in their everyday lives. They wanted to protect what mattered to them from harm and misfortune. They wanted their homes to tell the world something significant about who they were and what they valued. The Mosaics succeed at communicating all of that in ways that transcend time and language. Their frozen conversations across centuries, offering insights into lives that seemed impossibly distant and alien until we looked carefully at what was beneath their feet, in the intricate patterns of tesserae, in the careful placement of color and form, in the stories and symbols and warnings and celebrations embedded in stone. The Romans left us messages about power and fear and love and ambition, messages about daily life and spiritual hope, messages about what it meant to be human in a completely different world. We're only now learning how to read those messages fully, how to understand the secrets those floors were always trying to tell us.